The Richardson family home sat nestled on Maple Street, a two-story colonial with chipping white paint and a front porch where Thomas Richardson had spent countless evenings watching his children grow. At 67, Thomas still maintained the garden with the same precision he once applied to his accounting books, though his movements had slowed considerably since his retirement 5 years ago. On this particular Sunday afternoon, the entire family had gathered for their monthly dinner, a tradition Thomas's late wife, Eleanor, had insisted upon before cancer took her 3 years earlier. Her absence remained palpable in the dining room where Thomas now stood, watching his 3 adult children and their families filter in through the front door. "Dad, you've got to let someone help you with this place," said Michael, Thomas's eldest son, as he hung his coat by the door. At 42, Michael had inherited his father's practical nature along with the family's financial planning business. "The gutters are overflowing, and I noticed some rot starting on the porch steps." Thomas waved him off. "I've got it under control. Just been busy lately." "Busy with what, Dad?" "Watching reruns of Jeopardy." Sarah, his daughter, chimed in as she kissed his cheek. She balanced a homemade casserole in one hand while ushering her 2 teenage children inside with the other. At 39, Sarah had become the family mediator since Eleanor's passing, stepping into her mother's role with a determination that sometimes bordered on overbearing. "Leave him alone, you two." James, the youngest at 34, emerged from the kitchen with a beer in hand. "If Dad says he's fine, he's fine." Unlike his siblings, James had rejected the family business path, choosing instead to pursue a teaching career that paid half what his brother earned. He lived just 3 blocks away, dropping by his father's house several times a week, something neither Michael nor Sarah could say with their suburban homes 30 minutes outside town. Thomas led them to the dining table, where the conversation meandered through the usual topics: Michael's son's baseball tournament, Sarah's recent promotion, James's summer school program. But Thomas remained distracted, his eyes occasionally drifting to the manila envelope resting on the sideboard. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Sarah asked, noticing his distraction during a lull in conversation. Thomas cleared his throat. "Actually, there is something I wanted to talk about with all of you." He retrieved the envelope and returned to his seat at the head of the table. "I've been doing some thinking about the future, my future and yours." Michael straightened in his chair, always alert to discussions of planning. "What kind of thinking?" "I've decided to sell the house." The clatter of silverware against plates filled the sudden silence. "Sell the house." Sarah was the first to recover. "But Mom loved this place. We all grew up here." "That's exactly why it's time," Thomas explained, pulling papers from the envelope. "It's too big for just me. The maintenance is becoming more than I want to handle. And frankly, the memories." He paused, swallowing hard. "Sometimes they're overwhelming." "Where would you go?" James asked, his voice quiet. Thomas slid a glossy brochure across the table. "Riverside Gardens. It's a retirement community about an hour south, near the coast. Nice apartments, activities, medical staff on site." Michael picked up the brochure, studying it with a frown. "These places aren't cheap, Dad. Have you looked at the numbers?" "I have. The house should sell for enough to cover it, with some left over." "And what about the family business?" Michael asked, his tone sharpening. "You still own 60%. Thomas nodded. "I've thought about that too. I'm planning to transfer most of my shares to the 3 of you, divided equally." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Michael's face flushed red. "Equally? Dad, I've been running the business for 15 years. James has never spent a day there." "It's a family business," Thomas said firmly. "You've been well compensated for your work, Michael. This is about legacy." Sarah glanced between her brothers. "I think what Michael means is that there are practicalities to consider. James doesn't know the first thing about financial planning." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," James muttered. "You know what I mean," Sarah continued. "You're a great teacher, but this isn't your world." "And why isn't it?" James countered. "Because I chose a different path? Does that mean I'm not entitled to my share of what Dad built?" "You certainly didn't help build it," Michael said. "I gave up opportunities at bigger firms to keep Richardson Financial going. I've doubled our client base while you were off finding yourself." Thomas raised his hands. "This is exactly why we need to discuss this rationally. I haven't made any final decisions yet." "It sounds pretty final to me," Michael said, pushing back from the table. "Sounds like you're ready to throw away Mom's home and hand over a third of the business to someone who couldn't tell a mutual fund from a money market account." That's enough, Thomas said sharply. I didn't bring this up to start a fight. But the tension had already filled the room like smoke. Sarah's children exchanged uncomfortable glances, while her husband suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. Michael's wife placed a cautioning hand on his arm, which he promptly shrugged off. We should all take some time to think about this, Sarah suggested, ever the peacemaker. Dad's just floating ideas, right? Thomas nodded, though the brochure and papers before him suggested more than idle consideration. Right? But I don't want to put this off too long either. At my age, planning becomes more important, not less. The remainder of dinner passed with strained conversation, punctuated by long silences. As the families prepared to leave, the usual warm embraces were replaced by brief, awkward goodbyes. Only James lingered, helping his father clear the table while Michael and Sarah loaded their families into their respective SUVs. They'll come around, James said as they stood at the sink, Thomas washing while James dried. Thomas handed him a plate, their eyes meeting briefly. Will they? Or will this be the thing that finally breaks us? James had no answer, and Thomas didn't expect one. Outside, the evening had settled into a muted dusk, casting long shadows across the garden Eleanor had once tended with loving care. In the quiet kitchen, father and son continued their routine, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. 2 weeks after the disastrous family dinner, Michael sat in his corner office at Richardson Financial Planning, staring at the spreadsheet on his computer screen without really seeing it. The numbers blurred as his mind replayed the conversation with his father for what felt like the 100th time. His office phone buzzed. Your sister's here, his assistant announced. Michael sighed, closing the spreadsheet. Send her in. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking as put together as always in her tailored pantsuit, though the dark circles under her eyes suggested she wasn't sleeping well. Have you talked to Dad? She asked without preamble. Not since Sunday. I stopped by, but he wasn't home. Michael gestured to the chair across from his desk. James said he went to tour that retirement place again. Sarah sank into the chair, dropping her purse beside her. So he's serious about this. Looks that way. Michael leaned back, loosening his tie. He's coming in tomorrow to meet with our attorney about the business shares. And you're just going to let him do it? Sarah's voice rose slightly. Give James an equal share when he's never contributed? Michael's jaw tightened. What exactly would you have me do, Sarah? Dad still controls the majority. Legally, he can do whatever he wants. We could talk to him together, make him see reason. Maybe get Dr. Winters involved. Sarah referred to their father's longtime physician. He hasn't been the same since Mom died. Maybe he's not thinking clearly. Are you suggesting we have him declared incompetent because we don't like his decision? Michael's tone sharpened. That's a bit extreme, even for you. Sarah crossed her arms defensively. I'm not saying that. I just think he might be making emotional decisions right now. Selling the house, dividing the business. It's like he's settling his affairs. The unspoken implication hung between them. Neither wanted to voice the fear that their father might be hiding something about his health. Have you talked to James about this? Michael asked after a moment. Sarah's expression hardened. I tried. He says Dad has the right to do whatever he wants with his property, and we should respect that. Convenient position when you're about to get a third of a company you've contributed nothing to, Michael muttered. That's not fair, Sarah said, though without much conviction. James has his own life, his own career. He cares about Dad, not the money. Michael snorted. Easy to say when you've never had financial responsibility for anything bigger than a classroom hamster. This isn't helping, Sarah sighed, checking her watch. I have to pick up Emma from soccer practice. Just talk to Dad, okay? Maybe he'll listen to you. You've always been the business mind. After Sarah left, Michael tried to return to work, but his concentration was shot. Around 5, he packed up his briefcase and headed to his father's house instead of going straight home. He'd call Jennifer and tell her he'd be late for dinner. Thomas answered the door on the third knock, looking surprised to see his eldest son on the porch. Michael, didn't expect to see you today. Can I come in? Michael didn't wait for an answer, stepping past his father into the familiar entryway. The house smelled faintly of paint. What are you doing? Just freshening up the living room, Thomas replied, leading him into a space that now featured a newly painted accent wall in a modern slate blue. Realtor said it would help with resale value. Michael felt a stab of irritation. So you've already got a realtor. Just consultations so far, Thomas said, gesturing for Michael to sit. "Want something to drink?" "I made iced tea." Michael declined, remaining standing as his father settled into his worn leather recliner. "Dad, we need to talk about this business share transfer. I think you're making a mistake." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "I was wondering when we'd get to this conversation. I've dedicated my life to Richardson Financial. 15 years, Dad. I stayed local when I had offers from firms in Boston and New York because you said the business needed me. And I'll always be grateful for that, son. Then why are you doing this?" Michael's voice rose. "James doesn't know the first thing about what we do. He's never shown any interest. And now you want to hand him a third of what you and I built." Thomas leaned forward, hands clasped. "Michael, the business isn't just about spreadsheets and client portfolios. It's about family legacy. Your mother and I always intended for it to belong to all three of you." "Mom would have understood the practical implications," Michael argued. "What happens when James and Sarah want to make decisions about a business they don't understand? We'll end up deadlocked on every vote." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Thomas suggested quietly. "Maybe it will force the three of you to talk, to find compromise, to work together." Michael laughed bitterly. "Is that what this is about? Some manipulative plan to force us to get along better?" "It's about fairness, Michael. I know you see it differently." "Fairness?" Michael interrupted. "What's fair about giving someone an equal share of something they've never worked for? What's fair about ignoring 15 years of sacrifice?" The front door opened before Thomas could respond, and James walked in with grocery bags. "Hey, Dad, I got that paint for the upstairs." He stopped short, seeing Michael. "Oh, didn't know you were coming by." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Michael looked between his brother and father. "You're helping him fix up the house to sell." James set down the bags. "Someone had to. The place needs work before it can go on the market. And you're just fine with all of this? Mom's house being sold, getting a windfall from the business?" Michael's voice was cold. "This isn't about money for me," James said quietly. "It's about supporting Dad's decisions." "How convenient that his decisions benefit you so directly," Michael shot back. Thomas stood up. "That's enough. I won't have you two arguing like this in my house." "Don't worry," Michael said, grabbing his jacket. "I'm leaving. But this conversation isn't over, Dad. I've put too much into Richardson Financial to let you carve it up without a fight." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. In his car, he sat gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm his breathing. His phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. "Everything okay? Dinner's getting cold." Michael started the engine, mind racing. If his father wouldn't listen to reason, maybe there were other avenues. The company bylaws, perhaps. Or maybe Sarah was right. If their father wasn't thinking clearly, they had a responsibility to protect him from himself and protect the business in the process. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced back at the house. Through the living room window, he could see James and his father talking, heads close together. The sight only fueled his determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Meanwhile, inside the house, Thomas sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. "You okay, Dad?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. Thomas nodded slowly. "I expected resistance, but not this level of anger. Maybe Sarah's right. Maybe I should have handled this differently." James sat across from him. "You're doing what you think is right. Michael will come around eventually." "Will he?" Thomas gazed at the family photos on the mantel. Happier times when Eleanor was still with them, when the children were young and the future seemed limitless. "I'm not so sure. Your brother can hold a grudge like nobody's business. Gets that from me, I suppose. What are you going to do?" Thomas picked up the brochure for Riverside Gardens, turning it over in his hands. "Proceed as planned, I guess. I've lived long enough to know you can't make everyone happy. Sometimes you just have to do what feels right and deal with the fallout." But as darkness settled over the house that Eleanor had made a home, Thomas couldn't help wondering if the price of his decisions might be higher than he was prepared to pay. By early October, the Richardson family home bore a "for sale" sign in the front yard. Inside, half-packed boxes lined the hallways as Thomas methodically sorted through 40 years of accumulated memories. The process was both therapeutic and painful, each object carrying its own weight of history. Thomas stood in Eleanor's old sewing room, fingering a quilt she had made for their 30th anniversary, when the doorbell rang. Reluctantly setting the fabric aside, he made his way downstairs, expecting the realtor for their scheduled appointment. Instead, he found Sarah and Michael standing on the porch. They hadn't been in the same room since their argument 6 weeks earlier. "This is a surprise," Thomas said, ushering them inside. "I thought you were both working today." "We took the afternoon off," Sarah explained, her usual confident demeanor subdued. "We need to talk, Dad." Thomas led them into the kitchen, the one room still fully intact amid the packing chaos. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "We're fine," Michael said tersely. He placed a leather portfolio on the table between them. "We've come with a proposition." Thomas sat down slowly, suddenly aware of the solidarity between his two eldest children, a rare occurrence that immediately put him on alert. "What kind of proposition?" Sarah took a deep breath. "We've been talking, Michael and I. We think we found a compromise that might work for everyone." Michael opened the portfolio and slid several documents across the table. "We're prepared to buy the house from you at market value. Slightly above, actually. You'd have more than enough for that retirement community and a solid nest egg." Thomas glanced at the paperwork, immediately recognizing a real estate offer. "You want to buy the house?" "Keep it in the family," Sarah clarified. "Michael would buy it, and I'd contribute to renovations. We'd maintain it as a family property, somewhere we could all gather for holidays, somewhere the grandkids could always come back to." "That's thoughtful," Thomas said carefully, sensing there was more. "As for the business," Michael continued, "we've drafted a proposal for the share distribution." He pulled out another document. 51% to me, as the active manager, 25% to Sarah, who's expressed interest in joining the board, and a 10% non-voting share to James. Thomas stared at the numbers. "That's only 86%. The remaining 14 would stay with you," Sarah explained. "For income, for security." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying his children's faces. They'd clearly rehearsed this, probably spent hours crafting what they considered a reasonable compromise. "And James?" he asked quietly. "Have you discussed this with him?" A flicker of discomfort passed between them. "We wanted to get your agreement first," Michael said. "James will understand this is a business decision, not personal." Thomas fought to keep his expression neutral. "Cutting his share by 2/3 and removing his voting rights doesn't sound personal to you?" Sarah leaned forward. "Dad, be realistic. James has never shown interest in the business. He doesn't understand finance. Giving him equal say would be setting us all up for failure. And this plan wouldn't." "It's a practical solution," Michael insisted. "Everyone gets something, and the business remains viable without constant deadlock." Thomas folded his hands on the table. "I see. And if I don't agree?" Michael's expression hardened. "Then we'd have to explore other options to protect the business." "Is that a threat, Michael?" "It's a reality, Dad. I've built that company alongside you. I've earned the right to protect it." Thomas stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the tile floor. "You've earned the right? What about your brother? Hasn't he earned the right to be treated equally by his family?" "This isn't about equality," Sarah protested. "It's about capability." "No." Thomas cut her off, his voice suddenly sharp. "It's about greed and control. It's about you two deciding that your contributions are worth more than your brother's, that your connection to this family deserves more recognition than his." "That's not fair," Michael started. "Isn't it? James has been here every weekend helping me pack, organizing estate sales, painting walls. Where have you two been? Too busy to help, but not too busy to scheme about how to protect your interests." Sarah's face flushed. "We're trying to be practical. You're trying to manipulate me," Thomas corrected her. "And I'm disappointed in both of you." The front door opened, and James called out, "Dad, I brought those storage bins you wanted." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopping short at the sight of his siblings. "Oh, what's going on?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Thomas finally broke it. "Your brother and sister were just leaving." Michael gathered the papers with jerky movements. "Think about our offer, Dad. It's fair. Is it an offer or an ultimatum?" Thomas asked quietly. Sarah touched her father's arm. "We just want what's best for everyone." "No," Thomas said, pulling away. "You want what's best for yourselves. There's a difference." After they left, James looked at his father questioningly. "What was that about?" Thomas sank back into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his years. "They want to buy the house, keep it in the family, and they want to change the business share distribution to minimize your part in it." James was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe they're right, Dad. I don't know anything about the business." "That's not the point." Thomas said, frustration evident in his voice. It's about family, about treating each other with equal respect regardless of career choices or contributions. Michael's dedicated his life to the company, James pointed out. I can understand why he'd feel entitled to more. There's a difference between recognizing his contribution with salary and position and saying he's more entitled to his inheritance than you are, Thomas countered. Your mother would be heartbroken to see them acting this way. The mention of Eleanor sobered them both. James sat down across from his father. What are you going to do? I don't know, Thomas admitted, but I won't be bullied into changing my mind. The following morning, Thomas was at his attorney's office downtown, reviewing the final paperwork for the share transfer. As originally planned, the business would be divided equally among his 3 children, with Thomas retaining a small percentage. You understand this could create conflict, his attorney, Harold Winters, warned. Michael has been running the company for years. This changes the power dynamic significantly. The conflict is already here, Thomas said grimly. At least this way it's fair. When he returned home, he was surprised to find Sarah waiting in her car outside. She approached as he parked, her expression troubled. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Yesterday, that wasn't me. Or at least, not who I want to be. Thomas studied his daughter's face, seeing genuine remorse. What changed overnight? Sarah hugged herself against the autumn chill. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Mom, about what she would say if she saw us treating each other this way. She hesitated. And then this morning, I found this. She handed him a yellowed envelope with his name written in Eleanor's flowing script. It was in her recipe box. I was looking for her apple crisp recipe and found it tucked in the back. Thomas took it with trembling hands. You read it? Just enough to know it was important. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I'm sorry. For everything. I got so caught up in what seemed practical that I forgot what matters. Thomas opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before Eleanor died, when they both knew her time was short. He read it silently, tears gathering as his wife's voice seemed to fill his mind. What does it say? Sarah asked quietly. Thomas folded the letter carefully. It says that love is more important than fairness, but true fairness comes from love. She wanted us to remember that family isn't about equal transactions or keeping score. It's about supporting each other, even when it's difficult. Sarah wiped her eyes. I've been failing at that lately. We all have, Thomas admitted. But it's not too late to change course. Later that evening, Thomas sat on the porch swing, Eleanor's letter in his pocket, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. The for sale sign cast a long shadow across the lawn. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. We need to talk. Can I come by tomorrow? Thomas stared at the message for a long time before typing a simple reply. Yes. Whether this was an olive branch or another round of conflict, he couldn't say. But Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Remember that whatever they become, however they struggle, our children carry pieces of both of us. Be patient with those pieces as they find their way. As darkness fell over the house that had witnessed both their greatest joys and deepest sorrows, Thomas made a silent promise to his late wife. Whatever happened next, he would try to face it with the grace and wisdom she had always shown, and hope that somehow their fractured family could find its way back to solid ground. Michael arrived at his father's house promptly at 10 the next morning. He'd barely slept, rehearsing what he wanted to say, anticipating his father's responses, and planning counterarguments. But when Thomas opened the door, the carefully prepared speech evaporated from Michael's mind. His father looked older somehow, wearier than he had just days ago. The realization sent a pang of guilt through Michael's chest. Come in, Thomas said, stepping aside. I made coffee. They settled in the kitchen, which now looked even more dismantled than before. Most of the decorative items were gone, leaving only the essentials. A box on the counter was labeled Goodwill in James's handwriting. Thomas poured 2 mugs of coffee and sat across from his son. Sarah came by yesterday. I know, Michael said, adding a splash of cream to his coffee. She called me afterward. And Michael stared into his mug. She thinks we've been handling this all wrong. Maybe she's right. Thomas nodded slowly but said nothing, waiting for his son to continue. I've been thinking a lot about why this has hit me so hard, Michael finally said. It's not really about the shares or the voting rights. Not entirely, anyway. What is it about then? Michael struggled to find the right words. When Mom got sick, everything changed. You changed. You stepped back from the business, spent all your time with her. That was the right thing to do, he added hastily. But suddenly, I was shouldering everything alone. Every decision, every risk, every late night. You never complained, Thomas said quietly. How could I? Mom was dying. My problems seemed insignificant in comparison. Michael's voice cracked slightly. But they weren't insignificant to me. I was drowning, Dad. And I felt like no one noticed or cared. Thomas reached across the table, laying his hand over his son's. I'm sorry, Michael. I should have seen it. It's not your fault. You were going through your own hell. Michael took a deep breath. But then, when Mom was gone, I thought things would get back to normal. Instead, you decided to retire completely. And now, it feels like you're giving away the one thing I've dedicated my life to, treating it like it doesn't matter who gets a piece. That was never my intention, Thomas said. I'm proud of what you've accomplished with Richardson Financial. You've taken it further than I ever could. Then why change things now? Why risk destabilizing the company with this equal shares arrangement? Thomas was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. Do you remember when you were 10 and Sarah was 7, and you both wanted that red bicycle for Christmas? Michael frowned at the apparent change of subject. Vaguely, your mother and I could only afford one bike that year. We debated for weeks about what to do. Should we get you something else instead? Get a cheaper bike for each of you? In the end, we decided to get the red bike and have you share it. I remember you made a schedule, Michael said, the memory returning slowly. Even days for me, odd days for Sarah. Thomas nodded. You both complained at first, but then something unexpected happened. You started teaching Sarah how to ride. You took pride in her progress. By summer, you were taking turns without even looking at the schedule. What's your point, Dad? My point is that forcing you to share created something valuable. Cooperation, pride in each other's accomplishments, mutual respect. That's what I'm hoping for with the business. Thomas leaned back in his chair. I'm not naive, Michael. I know James doesn't have your expertise. Sarah either, for that matter. But they have other strengths, perspectives you might not have considered. Michael sighed. It still feels like my contributions are being devalued. Nothing could be further from the truth. But this isn't just about business acumen or who's put in the most hours. It's about my legacy to all my children. Thomas hesitated before adding. And about what your mother wanted. Michael looked up sharply. What do you mean? Thomas pulled Eleanor's letter from his pocket and slid it across the table. Sarah found this yesterday. Michael read the letter slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to a softer, more vulnerable look. When he finished, he carefully refolded along the creases. She was always the wise one, wasn't she? Wiser than I'll ever be, Thomas agreed with a sad smile. They sat in silence for several minutes, the tension between them not entirely gone, but somehow altered, less jagged around the edges. I still have concerns about how this will work in practice, Michael finally said. James doesn't know the industry. The clients trust me, not him. Then teach him, Thomas suggested. Not to take your place, but to understand enough to be a constructive board member. Maybe having someone who thinks differently could be an asset. Michael didn't look entirely convinced, but some of the rigid defensiveness had left his posture. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Thomas stood up and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a dusty bottle of scotch. Your mother and I were saving this for a special occasion. I think this qualifies. He poured 2 fingers into each of 2 glasses and handed one to Michael. To family, he said, raising his glass. Complicated, frustrating, and irreplaceable. Michael clinked his glass against his father's. To family. Later that afternoon, Thomas sat alone in the backyard, watching the October wind scatter golden leaves across the lawn. The property had always been too big for just 2 people, but Eleanor had insisted on the large yard for when the grandchildren came along. Now, 3 grandchildren later, he wondered if selling was really the right choice. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. A moment later, Sarah appeared around the side of the house, her teenage daughter Emma trailing behind. Mind if we join you? Sarah asked. Thomas gestured to the empty chairs beside him. Please do. Emma flopped dramatically into a seat. Mom made me come help pack instead of going to Zoe's house, she complained, though without much heat. Your grandfather needs help, Sarah said, giving her daughter a pointed look. Family comes first. It's fine, Thomas assured them. Actually, I've been thinking about the house. Sarah tensed visibly. What about it? I'm not sure selling is the right move anymore. But the retirement community will still be there in a year or two. Thomas finished for her. I'm not getting any younger, but I'm not on death's doorstep either. Emma looked up from her phone. So we're keeping the house? Cool. I like the treehouse in back. Thomas smiled at his granddaughter. The treehouse your grandfather built for your mother and uncles 30 years ago. Mom showed me pictures, Emma said. She had really bad hair back then. Hey, Sarah protested, but she was laughing. She turned to her father, expression growing serious again. Are you sure about this, Dad? What changed your mind? Thomas looked around at the yard where his children had played, the garden Eleanor had tended, the house that had sheltered them through joy and grief alike. Let's just say I've been reminded of what really matters. The back door opened, and James emerged with a tray of lemonade. Thought you might be thirsty out here. He noticed Sarah and Emma and hesitated. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Family, not company, Thomas corrected gently. Join us. As James distributed the glasses, Sarah caught his eye. I owe you an apology, little brother. James paused, clearly surprised. For what? For not respecting your choices. For acting like my path was somehow better than yours. For the business shares thing. She grimaced. Basically, for being a judgmental pain in the ass. James nearly spilled the lemonade. Who are you? And what have you done with my sister? Language, Uncle James, Emma said without looking up from her phone. Mom doesn't like swearing. They all laughed, the sound breaking some invisible barrier that had stood between them. James sat down beside his father. So what did I miss? Dad's thinking of keeping the house, Sarah informed him. James raised an eyebrow. Really? What about all the work we've done to get it ready for sale? Not wasted, Thomas assured him. The place needed updating anyway. They fell into easy conversation as the afternoon light softened around them. None of the underlying issues had been fully resolved, but something had shifted, a willingness to listen, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that family bonds were worth the effort of maintenance. When Michael's car pulled up an hour later, Emma waved him over. Dad's keeping the house, she called. Michael approached cautiously, briefcase in hand. Is that so? Thomas nodded. I'm reconsidering some decisions. Michael glanced at his siblings, clearly assessing the mood before responding. Well, that's good news, I think. Join us, Thomas asked, indicating the last empty chair. Michael hesitated only briefly before setting down his briefcase and taking a seat. I brought some papers from the office. Thought we might want to discuss options. Business can wait, Thomas said firmly. Right now, I want to hear about my grandchildren. Emma, how's that science project coming along? As Emma launched into a detailed explanation of her experiment on plant growth, Thomas caught Michael's eye and saw the tension in his son's shoulders ease slightly. They still had a long way to go, hard conversations yet to have. But for this moment, under the same trees that had sheltered them through childhood summers, they were simply family again. Imperfect, complicated, and together. November arrived with a biting chill, coating the Richardson family home in a layer of frost each morning. The for sale sign had been removed from the front yard, but inside, evidence of Thomas's planned departure remained. Half-packed boxes, labeled furniture, sorted photographs. The kitchen table, once the heart of family gatherings, had been temporarily converted into a makeshift conference room. Papers were spread across its surface as Thomas, Michael, Sarah, and James huddled around it one Sunday afternoon, coffee mugs and legal pads scattered between them. So we're agreed on the basic structure, Michael said, circling a figure on the document before him. Dad retains 20% ownership as a safety net. I'll maintain operational control as CEO, but major decisions require a supermajority vote. Sarah made a note on her pad, and the board will meet quarterly rather than annually, so everyone stays informed. With emergency sessions as needed, James added. The business share discussion had evolved over the past few weeks, moving from confrontation to negotiation. Thomas had stood firm on his children receiving equal shares, but concessions had been made regarding voting rights and operational decision-making. What about the equity division for new business ventures? Thomas asked, reviewing the draft agreement. Michael hesitated. I still think projects I initiate should reflect my greater involvement. But with caps, James countered. So the core business remains balanced. Sarah raised a hand to prevent the discussion from heating up again. Let's table that for now. Harold is coming tomorrow with the revised draft. We can address it then. Harold Winters, Thomas's attorney and longtime friend, had been instrumental in helping the family navigate the legal complexities of their arrangement. His decades of experience with family businesses had provided structure to their emotional negotiations. Thomas gathered the papers, signaling an end to the business portion of their meeting. Enough for today? Who's hungry? I ordered pizzas, James said, checking his watch. Should be here any minute. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. While James went to answer it, Sarah began clearing the paperwork to make room for dinner. We've made good progress today. I think this could actually work. Thomas nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic. The past month had been challenging. Heated arguments, tearful confrontations, and occasional walkouts had punctuated their discussions. But beneath the surface tension, a foundation of understanding had slowly emerged. James returned with pizza boxes and a six-pack of beer. Food's here. Michael helped distribute plates and napkins. Where are Jenny and the kids? I thought they were joining us. Soccer tournament in Springfield, Sarah explained. Regional finals. And Jennifer took our two to her mother's for the weekend, Michael added. Something about giving us space to sort things out without an audience. The absence of spouses and children had become common during these talks. While unspoken, all four Richardsons recognized that they needed to repair their own relationships before bringing in the extended family. As they settled around the table with their pizza, the conversation drifted to lighter topics: local news, an upcoming festival in town, a mutual friend's retirement party. The awkwardness that had marked their early post-argument interactions had faded, replaced by something approaching their former ease. So, Dad, Sarah said during a lull, you've been quiet about your own plans lately. Still thinking about Riverside Gardens eventually? Thomas took a sip of beer before answering. I'm considering my options. The house is too big for one person, but I'm not sure a retirement community is right for me either. You could get a smaller place in town, Michael suggested. A condo, maybe. Maybe. Thomas looked around the kitchen, at the height markers on the doorframe tracking his children's growth, the dent in the wall from James's hockey stick incident, the window Eleanor had insisted on enlarging to better view her garden. It's not easy leaving a place with so many memories. You could always stay, James said quietly. We could hire help for the maintenance. Maybe convert the downstairs guest room into a master suite so you wouldn't have to deal with the stairs as much. Thomas smiled at his youngest. Always the problem solver. He gets that from Mom, Sarah said, reaching for another slice. Remember how she'd always have 3 solutions ready for any crisis? 4, Michael corrected with a laugh. 3 practical ones and 1 completely outlandish option just to make us laugh. Like when the basement flooded during that thunderstorm, James recalled. And she suggested we convert it into an indoor swimming pool and charge the neighborhood kids admission. They all chuckled at the memory. These moments had become more frequent lately. Shared recollections of Eleanor that brought comfort rather than pain, stories that connected them rather than highlighting their differences. I have something to show you all, Thomas said, standing up suddenly. Wait here. He disappeared into his study and returned moments later with a worn leather-bound book. Your mother kept this. I found it while packing up her desk. He placed it on the table, opening to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Inside was Eleanor's handwriting, neat, flowing script filling the pages of what appeared to be a journal. Mom kept a diary? Sarah asked, surprised. Not exactly, Thomas explained. More like a family chronicle. She started it when Michael was born and kept it going right up until. He trailed off, the familiar ache of loss momentarily stealing his words. The siblings leaned in, eyes scanning the pages. Eleanor had documented not just milestones, first steps, school achievements, graduations, but everyday moments as well. Arguments between siblings, family vacations, quiet Sunday afternoons. I had no idea she wrote all this down, Michael said, voice hushed with awe as he turned a page that detailed his first business proposal at age 11. A neighborhood lawn mowing service that had employed both his siblings as reluctant assistants. She believed in preserving memories, Thomas said. The good and the bad. She used to say that a family's story isn't just in the perfect moments we put in photo albums, but in the messy, complicated times that shape who we become. They spent the next hour passing the journal between them, laughing at forgotten antics, cringing at teenage rebellions, and occasionally blinking back tears at particularly poignant entries. "Listen to this," Sarah said, reading from a page dated 15 years earlier. "Michael and James had another argument today about the car. Thomas thinks I should intervene, but I'm not so sure. They need to learn to resolve conflicts themselves. Still, I made them wash dishes together tonight. Hard to stay angry when you're both elbow deep in soapy water." James grinned. "I remember that. You kept splashing me. Because you were being a pain," Michael retorted, though without heat. "You scratched my car door and tried to blame it on Sarah. I was 15, and technically, it was Dad's car." Sarah turned another page. "Oh, here's one about me. Sarah announced today she's changing her major again, 3rd time this year. Thomas is concerned about the extra tuition, but I told him she's finding her way. Better to explore now than spend 40 years in the wrong career." "She was right," Thomas said softly. "You found your path eventually." Sarah nodded, her marketing executive position a far cry from the art history, psychology, and business majors she'd cycled through in college. As the evening progressed, the journal brought forth more shared memories, bridging some of the distance that had grown between them over the years. When Thomas finally closed it, something had subtly shifted in the room, a realization, perhaps, that their current conflict was just one chapter in a much longer family story. "We should get going," Michael said eventually, checking his watch. "It's getting late." They gathered their things, making plans to meet again later in the week when Harold would bring the revised agreement. At the door, Michael paused, turning to his father. "I've been thinking about what you said, about teaching James more about the business." His words came hesitantly, still testing this new territory. "Maybe he could shadow me for a few days, get a feel for the operation." James looked up in surprise. "Really? If you're interested," Michael added quickly. "No pressure." "I'd like that," James said. "Thanks." It was a small olive branch, but significant coming from Michael, who had guarded his professional territory so fiercely. Thomas felt a surge of pride watching his sons navigate toward common ground. After they had all departed, Thomas returned to the kitchen to clean up. The house felt different somehow, still filled with memories, but no longer quite so heavy with grief and uncertainty. As he washed dishes, he found himself humming one of Eleanor's favorite songs, something he hadn't done in years. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Dad? Sorry to call so late. I just wanted to say..." She paused, searching for words. "Thanks for not giving up on us. For giving us the chance to figure this out together." "That's what family does," Thomas replied simply. After they hung up, he walked through the quiet house, turning off lights, straightening cushions, his routine unchanged for decades. In the study, he picked up Eleanor's journal again, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. "They're finding their way," he whispered, as if she could hear him. "Just like you said they would." Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, dusting the Richardson home in a gentle white blanket. Thomas watched from the window, remembering countless winter evenings spent in this very spot with Eleanor beside him. For the first time in a long while, the memory brought more comfort than pain. Tomorrow would bring more negotiations, more details to iron out, more compromises to reach. But tonight, in the quiet of the home they had built together, Thomas felt certain they were moving in the right direction, not just toward a business arrangement that would work, but toward healing the fractures in their family. Christmas Eve arrived with a perfect blanket of snow-coating Maple Street. The Richardson family home stood transformed. Icicle lights hanging from the eaves, a wreath on the front door, and through the bay window, the glow of a Christmas tree adorned with decades of collected ornaments. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street, a testament to the full house within. In the kitchen, Thomas worked alongside his daughter-in-law Jennifer, Michael's wife, putting the finishing touches on Christmas dinner. The renovated space, with its new countertops and updated appliances, had been completed just days earlier, part of the compromise solution the family had ultimately reached. "Careful with those potatoes," Thomas warned as Jennifer mashed with vigor. "Eleanor always said lumps were a cardinal sin." Jennifer laughed. "I've been married to your son for 15 years, Thomas. I think I know the Richardson family mashed potato standards by now." From the living room came the sounds of children's laughter and Christmas music. The merged families, 3 siblings, their spouses, 5 grandchildren, had gathered for their traditional Christmas Eve celebration, the first since the conflict that had nearly torn them apart. "Need any help in here?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, wine glass in hand. "I think we've got it covered," Thomas replied, checking the turkey. "How are things out there?" "Chaotic, as usual," Sarah said with a smile. Emma's showing the cousins her new TikTok dance. James and Robert are arguing about football, and Michael is actually helping the kids hang their stockings instead of checking his phone every 5 minutes. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Progress indeed. The past 2 months had brought many changes to the Richardson family dynamic. After weeks of negotiation, they had finalized a new arrangement for both the house and the business, solutions that reflected compromise on all sides. The house remained in Thomas's name, but with a legal agreement establishing it as a family property. Thomas would continue living there, with a part-time caretaker to help with maintenance. Each sibling contributed to the upkeep costs proportionate to their income, and in return, all had access for family gatherings. The downstairs guest bedroom had been converted into a main-floor master suite for Thomas, complete with accessible bathroom features he didn't need yet, but might in the future. The business arrangement had evolved as well. While each sibling received equal shares in Richardson financial planning, their roles reflected their different strengths and interests. Michael maintained his position as CEO with expanded operational autonomy. Sarah, with her marketing expertise, joined the board and took on a consulting role for the firm's outreach and client acquisition strategies. The greatest surprise had come from James. After shadowing Michael for 2 weeks, he discovered an unexpected aptitude for client relations. His background and education made him particularly skilled at explaining complex financial concepts in accessible terms. He now worked part-time at the firm, heading a new initiative focused on financial literacy programs for schools and community centers. "Turkey's almost done," Thomas announced, checking his watch. "Someone should round up the troops." Jennifer wiped her hands on a dish towel. "I'll go. Sarah, can you grab the cranberry sauce from the fridge?" As the women bustled about putting final touches on the meal, Thomas took a moment to step back and observe. The kitchen had always been Eleanor's domain during holidays, her territory where she orchestrated family feasts with precision and love. For the first 2 years after her death, they had resorted to restaurant dinners, unable to face the empty space she'd left. This return to tradition felt significant, a recognition that they could honor her memory by continuing what she had started. The dining room table had been extended to its full length, accommodating all 14 family members. Thomas had spent the afternoon setting it with Eleanor's good china and silverware, unpacked from the boxes where they'd been stored during the renovations. 5-year-old Lily, Michael's youngest, had helped arrange name cards with earnest concentration. "Dinner's ready," Jennifer called, and the announcement set off a flurry of movement as everyone found their places. Thomas took his seat at the head of the table, looking down the length at the faces of his family. Michael sat at the opposite end, a position he'd never taken before, always leaving it empty in Eleanor's honor. The symbolic gesture wasn't lost on Thomas, who felt a mixture of melancholy and pride seeing his eldest take on the role. "Before we eat," Thomas said, raising his glass, "I'd like to say something." The table quieted, all eyes turning to him. This year has been challenging. He chose his words carefully, mindful of the young ears present. "We've had disagreements. We've said things we regret. We've struggled to find our way forward together." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, while James studied his plate. "But families aren't built on perfect moments," Thomas continued. "They're forged through difficulties overcome together. They're strengthened by finding paths forward when the way seems impossible." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each adult. "I'm proud of all of you, not despite our struggles these past months, but because of how we've worked through them." Eleanor would be proud too. He raised his glass higher. "To family, to memory, and to new beginnings." "To family," they echoed, glasses clinking. As the meal proceeded, conversation flowed easily around the table, punctuated by laughter and the occasional squabble between cousins. Thomas found himself speaking less, content to observe the interactions unfolding around him. Near the end of the meal, Michael tapped his glass for attention. "I have an announcement to make." The table quieted once more. "As you all know, Richardson Financial has had quite a year. Despite our internal restructuring," he said with a wry smile, "we've actually seen significant growth." That's wonderful, Thomas said, genuinely pleased. The business had been a concern during their disagreements, whether the conflict would affect client confidence or internal operations. I attribute that success to our new approach, Michael continued. Sarah's marketing strategy has brought in 20 new clients this quarter alone, and James's community outreach program has generated more positive press than we've had in years. James looked surprised at the public acknowledgement. It's still early days for that initiative, but it's already making a difference, Michael insisted. Which brings me to my announcement. The board, that's Dad, Sarah, James, and myself, have unanimously approved the creation of a new foundation under the Richardson financial umbrella. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, passing it to Thomas. The Eleanor Richardson Memorial Foundation for Financial Education will provide scholarships, community workshops, and resources to help underserved populations achieve financial literacy and independence. Thomas unfolded the paper, scanning the details of the foundation's mission statement and initial funding. This is extraordinary. It was James's idea, actually, Michael admitted. He pointed out that Mom was always helping people understand their finances, relatives, neighbors, friends. This seemed like a fitting tribute. Thomas looked at his youngest son, seeing Eleanor's compassion reflected in his eyes. She would have loved this. After dinner, as the family dispersed throughout the house, children playing with new toys, adults settling into conversations in small groups, Thomas found himself alone in the study. The room had been his sanctuary during the difficult months of negotiation, the place where he'd pored over proposals and counterproposals, seeking solutions that would honor both his wishes and his children's needs. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Michael stood in the doorway, 2 glasses of scotch in hand. Mind some company? Thomas gestured to the chair across from his. Not at all. Michael handed him a glass and settled into the leather armchair. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the distant sounds of family celebration filtering through the closed door. I owe you an apology, Michael finally said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Another one? I thought we were past that stage. This is different. Michael swirled the amber liquid in his glass. I've been reflecting on why I reacted so strongly to your decision about the business shares. It wasn't really about James's lack of experience or Sarah's part-time involvement. What was it about? Michael took a deep breath. I think I've been angry with you since Mom got sick. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down. He met his father's gaze directly. You stepped back when she needed you, and I respected that. But part of me resented being left to carry everything alone. Thomas felt a pang of recognition. I never thanked you properly for stepping up during that time. I didn't want thanks, Michael said, shaking his head. I wanted partnership. And when you announced your decisions about the house and business, it felt like you were walking away again, leaving me to deal with the consequences. I never saw it that way, Thomas admitted. But I understand why you did. The thing is, Michael continued, these past few months have taught me something important. I'm not alone in carrying the Richardson legacy. I never was. Sarah and James bring different strengths to the table, perspectives I wouldn't have considered, approaches I wouldn't have tried. Thomas nodded, recognizing the hard-won wisdom in his son's words. Your mother used to say that the strongest bridges are built with different materials. Sounds like her, Michael said with a soft laugh. He raised his glass. To Mom. To Mom. Thomas agreed, the glasses clinking softly. When they rejoined the others in the living room, Thomas found James helping his nieces and nephews arrange cookies and milk for Santa. Sarah sat nearby, deep in conversation with Jennifer about the school board election coming in spring. Thomas eased into his favorite armchair, taking in the scene before him. The house felt right again, filled with life and argument and laughter, the perfect imperfection of family. Later, as the evening wound down and families began gathering their belongings to head home, Thomas stood in the front doorway saying goodbyes. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside pristine and quiet under a clear winter sky. You're sure you'll be okay here alone? Sarah asked as she hugged him goodbye. Thomas smiled at his daughter's concern. I'm not alone. Mrs. Harmon will be by tomorrow afternoon to check in, and James and Lisa are coming for leftovers tomorrow evening. Call if you need anything, Michael said, clapping him on the shoulder. I will. Drive safely. Thomas stood on the porch until the last taillights disappeared around the corner, the cold night air sharp in his lungs. The house behind him was quiet now, but not empty. It remained filled with memories both old and new. Inside, he moved through the rooms, turning off lights, straightening cushions, gathering abandoned napkins and glasses. In the kitchen, he found a small package on the counter that hadn't been there before, wrapped in simple red paper with his name on the tag. He opened it carefully to find a framed photograph he'd never seen before. All three of his children together on the porch of this very house, taken just weeks ago during the renovation. On the back, each had signed their name with a simple message: "Thank you for bringing us home." Thomas placed the frame on the mantel beside the last family photo taken with Eleanor. Past and present, side by side, not in opposition but in continuation. He touched each frame lightly, feeling the connection between them, the thread of family running unbroken through all their struggles and triumphs. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he whispered to the quiet house. "We're going to be okay." Outside, a new snowfall began, soft flakes drifting down to cover the footprints in the yard, creating a clean page for tomorrow's stories to unfold.